Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name's Rudy Page, and welcome to another chapter from my life and book. This week we have with us PD Lord, and this, of course, is in collaboration with EALING Libraries. So today it's just myself and PD Lord who will have a dialogue for the next hour or so. And it is going to be an incredible journey. Good evening, PD Lord.
Good evening, Rudy. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about my novel, The Journey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for really, making contact. It's great. So let's get into the book, The Journey. The characters are so rich and diverse. Where did you get the inspiration for this story?
Oh, okay, yeah. Without sounding like I need some medical attention, the characters have been with me for decades. I've always, I've grown up with these characters. I've developed them over time. And I wrote the book. So I suppose my inspiration was that there was a burning desire to write this book with these particular characters. And that's what I did. And I've always written. I've written since the age of 8. And I wanted to tell a story about Black, British, Caribbean people, their first generation children. And I'm a first generation daughter of migrants, and I lived in a small town and we had a Marcus Garvey. So every Saturday we would all go to the club, is what we would call it, and there would be everybody from pretty much every Caribbean island there, just relaxing and partying and just coming together as a community. And as a young child, I absorbed a lot of gossip because I was the youngest of my 7 siblings. So I got dragged literally everywhere. And, back in the 70s and the 80s, I was the child that was seen and never heard. So people would forget that I was in the room and, talk about stuff. So
reveal all the secrets.
I'm telling you. So I think a lot of my inspiration from this book has come from my own family. I come from a brilliant family of storytellers, if I'm honest, aunts who, and we've all got that, whether you're from a Caribbean or African background, you meet up with your family, your family's, recounting a story, and the kids are wetting themselves because of the comedic value, and they're not even trying to be funny. So I think that I just organically picked some of the storytelling up from my family. And I just really enjoyed these characters once they started to be developed. And, my characters are strong women in particular. They are, this is a book of family. This is a book of love. This is a book of, families that love each other, but may not always get on along with each other. And as you know, the main character, Edwina, it sounds really sad, but you meet her in hospital for the very first time and she's dying. Yeah. And so, you read the first chapter, you must think, oh my goodness, this is absolutely, this is a page turner.
Yes. I mean, I was going to ask you about that. In fact, the fact that the main character, Edwina, is able to go back in time through her adult life and then was able to see her childhood. So this really brings the story together and connects the reader with, so what made you come up with that concept? And did you recognize at the time it would send a powerful message to the reader?
Art imitates life. So in 2005, my mother had cancer and spent the last 3 weeks of her life in hospital. And I was able to see both her passing, but also the journey to her getting really unwell. And there would be days actually that she would be in hospital and she may have only been with us for maybe an hour of that day, and she would drift off and seem quite happy. And I suppose I came up with that concept based on that lived experience that I had. And many people have contacted me who have read this book around the globe, actually, and have said that it really resonated with them. So for those of your viewers that have not read the book, essentially, Edwina is able to go back and relive some of her childhood moments, whilst in the parallel, her children and her husband are in this vacuum of sadness at the hospital and trying to be there and be with her. And, you know, there are some, if you've been through that process, which is actually quite humbling, there are some real funny moments, especially when you're with your family. You know, you find humor and light in the darkest of places at times. And so some of that humor came out. You know, some days we'd get annoyed with each other, but I think more importantly, the focus has always been about ensuring that you were there for mum. And so I think that people relate to it because it's authentic. And if you've been in that scenario and you have family and you're not all, you know, bosom buddies, because not all families are like that, you get to the point whereby you all have, for the very first time, because we're all different, you all have a singular focus at that one time, and everything else just falls away. And I think that was really what I was trying to convey. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, in fact, there was one particular line that sort of jumped out at me when Edwina says, maybe when I am dead, I will understand why I feel so well, which I thought was an interesting line. I mean,
this is all imagination. So this part never happened. But as she goes back in time, she becomes younger. So as she's, you know, as she gets transported to 1936 back to St. Thomas, Jamaica, you know, on her grandmother's land, she actually sees her 6-year-old self, you know, actually, no, that's 1942. So she actually sees her 6-year-old self. And but she doesn't go back as this ailing elderly lady. She goes back as her best self, you know. And so she's going through this whole she's going through this whole, I don't want to use journey, but she's going through this whole experience whereby she's got this energy, and as she's going back, she's meeting all of these amazing people. And, you know, she meets one particular man on every night that she's transported back. And she's just like, I am absolutely loving this whole experience. But for most of it, she thinks that she's teetering between, you know, this life and the next. And she's embracing what the next life could be, because it's not terrible. It's
transition.
Not just dark. Yeah, it's life. It's vibrancy.
So is she actually meeting herself in all the different forms as a character develops over the years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And she sees parts of her life as she's going backwards. You know, she's seeing New Year's Eve parties, and, you know, but none of the rubbish ones, the really good ones. Oh, that was a good year. And, you know, she's going back to places that she loved, like Trinidad, and she's like, oh my God, this is amazing. So, you know, and I suppose that's how this could purely be me, but that's how I envisage how beautiful, and I shouldn't say that, but how beautiful passing over could be. I think it has to be about something bigger and better.
Celebration.
Absolutely, and marvelous, and about all of the great experiences that you've had.
Yeah. So the novel has it all. You know, the relationship that Edwina has with her grandmothers is central to the story. In contrast, both Mina and Phyllis are grandparents. As grandparents, are like night and day. So what motivated you to write these characters, and why?
Okay, that's a good one. So the relationships within the book, the female relationships, as I said, ultimately, this book is about family. It doesn't matter where you're from, what race or culture, women are the center of every family, you know. And if we think of the magnificent women in our lives that we know, they may not, you know, in some families, the mother or the grandmother may not have a degree, but I'm telling you what, that woman's the accountant for the family, right? She may not know the law, but she's telling the children every time, don't bring police to my door, and you know. So I really wanted to bring out the relationships that I have experienced with some strong, brilliant women in my life, you know, aunts, mother, sisters, friends. And one of the things that I have seen in my life, but I wanted to talk about both in the 1930s and 40s to present day, was about the relationships between the women. And effectively, well, not effect, I did it. We talk about colorism, colonialism, and a lot of those issues that in some Caribbean islands still transcend today, even in the UK, actually, you know, in the world, you know, let's be real. And so the relationships of these women regarding economy, status, class. So you have Edwina, who is born to a Jamaican girl, and her father is an octoroon. So they wanted, you know, the rich side, the octoroon family wanted this child, because this child was the epitome of the colorism and the colonialism, light, bright eyes. And so
the bloodline.
Pardon?
The bloodline. Right.
And in a sense, the bloodline carried on, even though there was a dark-skinned Jamaican woman as the mother of this child. And so I wanted to show the complexities of those relationships and those attitudes. And I wanted to show a lot of the injustice that occurred based on how dark your skin was, even if you lived in a country that was predominantly Black. Yeah. And I wanted my readers to understand the class structures and how wealth has, and it's no different than today, but you know, if you get into trouble and you're a multi-millionaire, there are advantages to you that are not afforded to those individuals who are in poverty.
Yeah,
and so
there is a social order.
I'm sorry.
There is a social order. That's
right. And so when we think of Edwina's family, you know, who the dark side of the family, they were entrepreneurs. So, you know, they were able to buy land and build a plantation, but they still weren't seen as good enough. And not because they didn't have money, but then this whole shadism and colorism comes into play. And I just thought it was important to be able to illustrate that and how that transcends in today.
Okay, so when you introduce each character, the narrative is in the first person, and to me feels like they're blaming each other for where they are in their lives, you know, the emotions. So what was the intention behind that?
So that's a very good question, and you're not the first person that has spoken to me about this. And I did a book club, and one of the women said, I just felt so uncomfortable reading this because it just feels like you're saying that all these people, it's all their fault. I was like, no, not quite. That's not, that wasn't the intention. So I think when I think of my characters, they are all very complex. So, you know, you've got Edwina. Edwina is going to have her own narrative about what's happened to her. And she goes back in time. And she goes, the purpose of her going back in time is purely based on the fact that she did not remember her childhood, no matter how hard she tried in adulthood. And So she was able to block out trauma. And she, you know, the closer that she got to the end of her life and the more drugs that she was able to have, she was in this fortunate position to be able to go back and actually piece some of those dots that had made her question a few things in adulthood. And so everything that happened to her, you know, she sees the murder of her grandmother, of course she's going to have her own opinion about that. You know, she's then moved into this house with people that are horrible. You know, her grandmother, her father's an alcoholic, and you know, the only light that she has in this new world is her other grandfather, who is an amazing human being, but doesn't like his family, so he's never there. He's with his mistress. So you know, so through her lens, of course, you know, she's going to be thinking, of course, all these people make my life absolute hell and I hate them all. But then when you look at Harold, each character's story unfolds. So this book, The Journey, is the first of 3 novels. Okay. So in this novel, we are just introducing those characters and where they are in 2005, whilst, you know, Edwina is going through her final transition. And so when I think of Jonathan, you know, Edwina's son, who plays a huge part in this novel, he's the only son of Jamaican parents who are very proud of him, the only child that went to university. They are very proud of him. Mm-hmm. And, you know, his role as victim is, my parents don't understand that I'm gay. And so that's complex. And then if you look at Harold has a completely, you know, the father has a completely different view, because his son came out in the 80s, a week after, you know, the UK was watching all of that information about AIDS. I don't know if you remember that, you know, they had a week-long campaign. Yeah. So he's hearing all of this stuff about why people catch AIDS, why men catch AIDS, and then he's got his son, and this is a Jamaican man that tells him this is how he feels, and it does not go the way that Jonathan expects it to go. So of course his narrative comes from a place of rejection and hurt. And then you've got Phoebe, who is the middle child, that has middle child syndrome. And maybe many of you, I might get letters now from many of your listeners. I'm a middle child and I'm fine.
Careful.
She has traditional middle child syndrome and behaves in that manner. And the final child is Maddie, who has a narrative as to why her life is so terrible. And, you know, being the youngest, she blames her other siblings. Yeah. So from each individual's perspective, there aren't many people that would actually say, I'm this messed up because I messed up. It's normally my circumstance. I don't have enough money. And it really does bring that together in this in the first book, which is quite funny, but also quite sad. But now that you're introduced to the characters, you see more about them in the return, and it's their journey on actually finding their feet and taking a bit of responsibility and stuff. So yeah,
there is a complexity across the generations, which you've kind of alluded to. And you know, you've mentioned about the father and son dynamics, but can you say a bit more about the complexity of Barrington Jr. in terms of his
I don't want to give anybody too much, because then if you've not read the book, but he is just a sad and messed up puppy. And it's based on, and if I'm absolutely honest, I really like this guy as a person, because I think that as his character evolves, you see a huge level of vulnerability and trauma that occurred when he was a child. So, but you see, what you actually see in the 1930s and 40s is his way of dealing with that trauma. Yeah. And then you've got the complexity of him being an octoroon and the complexity of having a very wealthy white father and all of that privilege that comes with that bloodline, and his prejudgments and his belief that he can have what he wants when he wants. And so, you know, I think 3/4 of the way through the book, you actually see a different side to Barrington. You know, 75% of the time he's a brute and a pig. But when you start to understand what has led him to become that type of human being, you do take some time to well, you know, I hope you do take some time to have a bit of sympathy. And the majority of his unhappiness, the majority of his pain comes from the fact that he truly believes that his father doesn't love him.
So really, then, without giving too much away, will readers like the characters? They have their favorite? No.
Because that would be boring. No.
So they shouldn't have any sympathy then. Well, or should they have sympathy?
I think as you get to know each character, I think you start off having one position about them, and as the book unravels itself and the stories and the characters unravel themselves, I think that you really do start to like them. I mean, Edwina, I think you will have nothing but compassion and empathy and sympathy for this young child and this older woman that goes back and witnesses everything that unfolds in this young child's life. And you look at a character like Barrington Jr. and you just think, oh, if you was in my life, I'd find the means to shoot you and take you off the planet, because you're an oxygen thief. Up until the point that you get towards the end of the book and you actually realize this is all coming from a place of trauma, and all of this conflict is because this individual just doesn't know how to be. And then you look at somebody like Barrington Sr. and you really like the guy, but he does some things that you are just like, ooh. And that's the conflict, because it's like, I really, really like you as a person, but there is an animal underneath that really sedate and calm water that comes out and surprises everybody. And then, you know, you love Mima. Who's not going to love Mima? Mima, the pillar of the community. Mima, the entrepreneur that's done well and looks after, you know, her village, you know. And you hate Phyllis, because again, she comes from that line of privilege, and she is very, what's the word? She is very colonial. She's an absolute snob. She's a classist, but she does have, I shouldn't say but, because you actually, you know, when you say but, it just negates everything that you've said before.
However.
Also, towards the end of the book, you see a different side of her, and that side is the love and compassion that she has for the granddaughter that is 19, who has grown into this amazing woman in spite of her, you know? And so I think you know, from the older generation, so, you know, as she goes back to the old part of the book, there's a love-hate relationship. And then with the new book, you know, with the new children, with the current time in 2005, not many people like Phoebe. Not many, you know, people like John but think he's weak, and I don't think people know what to make of Maddie. And I think as their characters evolve in the next book, people are like, oh my gosh, this is how it all, you know, this is how these characters blend and make this cake so brilliant, you know.
So with Edwina as the main character, obviously, even in the condition and position that she's in, does she have really a level of manipulation with all these relationships in a strange sort of way?
You are good. You are very good. She does. She really, really does. I could only describe Edwina, if you ever met her now, as not so much the quietest person in the room, but not an individual that would be the center of attention. If you ever went into a room, Edwina would have her back against the wall and she'd be scoping that room.
Deliberately so as well.
Yeah, exactly. And she's shrewd. And the reason why she's shrewd is because, and she doesn't realize this in adult life, but she's naturally shrewd because she has been trained to be shrewd, you know, living with her grandmother, Phyllis, and, you know, Barrington Senior, and seeing her father, Barrington Junior. Some of that has stuck, you know. She's not an unkind person, but she's
calculated.
Yeah, and clever, and you don't really see much of that in book one, but my goodness, by book two, you're like, wow, okay. And she's determined, and she definitely gets what she wants, doesn't shout about it. And so when I think of, you know, women of my mother's generation, you know, we see that some women are very good at getting what they want. That doesn't mean that they're unpleasant. But it was a different time then, you know. It was irrespective of how bright the women were, the men were actually seen to be the head of the household. But, and I'm not saying this to denigrate anyone, this is just a fact for me, so I'm sure you're going to tell me if I'm being
We're back to the social order, remember?
Pardon?
We're back to the social order.
Yes, that's right. But in actual fact, in reality, it's reversed, because the women is the spine, you know, and if you break the spine, nothing else works. You know, we are the backbone of families. You know, most of my family, most of the boys and girls in my family, you know, when I think of aunts and uncles, if your mother said you weren't doing it, you weren't doing it. Yes, your father was a disciplinarian to a point, but if your mother said it's not happening, it really was not happening. And so you see that very much with Edwina, you know, and that steely determination that she has. It's in particular in the beginning of her, you know, teenage years, when she actually becomes really independent, because she can be, and you see that independence, and, you know, not really caring about Harold's opinion of their son when he comes out in the 80s and says what he says, and the father has one view and she's just like, listen, that's my child, and, you know, like, because, you know, it's the 80s and he's heard all of this really negative stuff about HIV and AIDS, and but, you know, Edwina's the one that's like, actually, no, this is my child, and if you don't like it, you know, you leave. And it's like, what are you saying to me? I'm not the one that's gay. So I like her. I really like her as a character, but yeah, she's shrewd. She's very shrewd.
So just before we get to the end now, then, what is somebody thinking of picking up the book for the first time now? What message would you like to leave with them today?
I would say read the book and then send it to all your friends, naturally. But if you want a book that is going to really make you laugh in places and make you think about your own relationships, because the way that the book is written, there is a character that every family has, and I've spoken to lots of my readers, you know, Asian, Black, white, you know, from the United States, Europe, and they've all said, oh my God, my sister was in that book, or I knew who you were, you know. And so, and I think that's the beauty of family and love and loyalty and friendship and disagreements and arguments, is that it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, there will be somebody in that family dynamic that you can relate to.
Yeah.
So I would say that the story unfolds, it's action packed actually. And it's action packed because I think as a writer, I've been influenced by many, many shows, but one of my best shows on the planet, and you're going to look at me and must throw your eyes up. And this was a show that I shared with my mother, was Dynasty. Okay. And so one of the things that they were able to do that no other show was able to do in the 80s, they were able to bring a cliffhanger, you know, to the point that you were wishing the week to go by so that you could find out what was going to happen next. And so as I wrote the book, at the end of every chapter, there was something that you were like, oh, I need to know more.
Keep turning.
About, you know, and so I would also get complaints from people just saying, I've not slept for 3 days. I'm reading this book, so I just need to know what happens with Rita. So if you want a book that's actually going to entice you and is going to make you want to keep reading, pick it up. It's based in Jamaica and London, so it's got that whole, you know, London vibe. You know, it's North London, it's Islington, it's you know, young people in their prime going through something terrible in one of the best cities in the world, you know. And it's fun, you know. I know it sounds awful, but it's actually quite a fun book, and I find the female characters in particular really inspirational.
Yeah, and you've made them very powerful as well, which is
because I'm sick of reading about us being victims all the time. It's just so boring. And again, I have to go back to, you know, the women that have influenced me. And you're from the UK. I know that in your town there most probably was a Marcus Garvey. If you went into there, or even in church, or seeing community and family friends, I don't know many West Indian women that are wallflowers. I just don't know many. And so, and when we are depicted in that way, and look, I'm sure there are some, I just think it just robs us of our richness and our light and the ability for us to show our splendor. And when I think of the challenges that our parents would have had to have gone through coming to this country, even if you were a wallflower on day one, my lovely, you will not be a wallflower after week 2.
Exactly. So
let's talk about how we had to endure and come here and be real and defend ourselves and not take too much rubbish and stay knitted within the community, and how the women became really valuable to each other.
Yeah, and you make a great point, because that Windrush generation, and then us, the children of the Windrush generation, there's still many, many stories to be told. So we haven't even scratched the surface yet.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, you know, if you think of the children that I write about, I mean, the legacy of first generation Jamaican parents in the UK in itself, you know, that's a comedic book in itself, but actually it's life, and a lot of us will be able to resonate with that. You know, we can all talk about the living rooms with the plastic on there, and you know,
the paraffin lamp.
Every Caribbean child will know if I start describing the living room of Edwina and Harold, and you've got the West Indian cricket team in Pride and Place, right? Yeah. So, you know, and these are the things that we have to celebrate, because we've, you know, between the second and the third generation, so much is lost already, right? And I just think it's important that we capture this, you know, in really in-depth, rich, sad, funny, tragic stories, you know?
Yeah, great. So where is the book available?
Good thing you asked me that. Yay! You hold your copy. So where is it available? It's available on Amazon.
Okay.
If you put in The Journey PD Lord, you will come across it. And also you could go directly to my website if you want to know more about me and what I do.
And your website is? And your website?
www.authorpdlord.com.
Yeah,
so,
that's Lord with an E.
Lord with an E, yeah. Not the other guy. This is me.
Otherwise, that would have been another conversation altogether.
Do you know, I can't even take responsibility for this name. Actually, it's my husband's name. So yeah, but you'll meet him, I'm sure, at some point, and have a really interesting discussion about his lineage, and why they call themselves Lord. But yeah, no, it's a great book, and you know, and we're in a time that it's really important that we support different voices and, you know, different stories, and I think the beauty about doing that is that we will be able to recognize that we're all quite similar when it comes to family.
Absolutely. And as I always say, we need to hear the voices of all Londoners.
Absolutely.
So well, congratulations. Great book, The Journey by P.D. Lord, and take very good care of yourself. Thank you very much.
And I will do. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I can't believe the time. So yeah, we could have kept talking about my characters in my head that I've developed for the last 30 odd years.
Exactly. So thank you very much, everybody, for watching us and listening to us. And this will also be rebroadcast on Fresh FM Radio London. And so from me, goodbye. A chapter from your life and book with P.D. Lord, The Journey. Thank you, in collaboration with EALING Libraries. Good night.
Thank you.